Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this week's Everyday Inclusion and Belonging. Woo! What a week it has been. I am super, super excited. I feel like this is so incredibly timely, the conversation that we're about to have around social anxiety and inclusion. And Kirsten and I met, Kirsten, it was probably 10 years ago.
Probably, yeah.
Um, and we sort of followed each other's path, and we were both at the forum on workplace inclusion. And she walked by and I was like, Kirsten, like we've only seen each other. That was our second time in person, and got caught up. And I was really excited to hear what Kirsten is up to. She's made a shift in her career that I'd seen online. And now with everything that's happening in the world, I'm thrilled, Kirsten, to have you join us. If you would just give a little introduction, and then we'll jump into this conversation about social anxiety and inclusion.
Yeah, awesome. Well, very excited to be here. And so Kirsten Mickish. And as you mentioned, I made a shift in career. So mid 2018, left my corporate career after more than 20 years in a variety of HR leadership positions, and several of those years doing diversity and inclusion work, along with talent and learning and development and so on. And so it was a big shift, because not only did I leave the corporate world to start a small business called Connect Human with my older son, Taylor, but our initial and still our primary area of focus has been on a kids product and services related to that called Connect Human, or Connection Zoo, sorry. And but at Connect Human, what we're all about is creating human connection that improves well-being and performance. So this Connection Zoo product is in that space for kids. I have been along the way continuing to do work that is both comfortable and that I love in kind of my HR area in terms of coaching, workshops and consulting, but we'll be more focused on some of the adult solutions that we've been thinking about towards the end of this year. So that is what I've been up to.
Well, and I think your personal connection to this issue, I would love for you to share, and then we can just talk about, let's even talk about what social anxiety is. But if you would sort of tee us off in terms of why this is near and dear to your heart.
Yeah. So, when I asked my son if he wanted to partner on this business, it was as I was leaving my job, and was very, very focused on career and what's next and what am I going to do for a job and for money and so on. But I want it to be fulfilling. And after about a month out of the corporate environment, and I started to kind of decompress, I realized, I have a really personal connection to this in terms of, as a kid, I grew up with a lot of generalized and social anxiety. And our product teaches social and emotional intelligence skills to kids. And it's for all kids, but particularly those who experience social worry and anxiety. And so as a kid, I also was a perfectionist. And but for me, talking about what I was feeling felt like I would be found out as a failure, as weak, as broken. And so I never told anyone, I never talked to anyone about the fear and the challenges that I was having. And as a result, it was very scary and very lonely. And I didn't know that I could talk about it, and I wouldn't have known how. Right. And so for me, particularly starting with kids and their families and educators and other caregivers, was really important to help equip kids for life, both now and as they move into and become adults, so that they do not have to have the same kind of experience that I did.
Well, and that's a really great segue, and I so appreciate you sharing that, because you talked about, you didn't know that you would have had the language and the tools. There are many adults that don't. We actually, on purpose, have an entire section in the Everyday Inclusion app around mental health issues, And we have a series of inclusion interviews, and one of the inclusion interviews is a woman talking about she has both social anxiety and depression.
Mm.
And she said it's terrifying for me to even be here doing this one-to-one interview. And she said, but if it can help one person be an ally and understand. So let's talk about what social anxiety is. What does it look like? How does it show up? And how, as adults working together, out in the world, how does it impact inclusion?
Yeah, well, I'll start with what it's not, because I think a lot of people assume that it's the same as being shy or introverted. And that's not the case.
Or like before I get up on stage, right? I feel anxious and I feel stressed, but that's not social anxiety.
Yeah, so everybody experiences that kind of stress or anxiety in certain situations. Everyone does it sometime. People, however, who for whom this is kind of their regular experience, imagine that as how you feel most of the time, or all of the time, or regularly. And so it's the other thing to know is that it is not, so it's fear is what it is, and it is an intense anxiety or fear of being judged, of being criticized, negatively evaluated, rejected in a social or a performance situation. And so it's about the performance aspects, and it's about interactions with others. And it's one of the things that it's important to know is it's not safe to assume that people that experience anxiety have the same experience.
Great.
Right?
Yeah.
It's different for every person. There may be some similarities, but each person's experience is their own experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the interview, this woman is talking about like literally feeling sick, right? Having, the hands sweating, and this is, sitting in a meeting, right? Even wanting to contribute in a meeting.
Yeah.
And she said, what it looks like for me is that I'm there and I'm quiet and I'm not saying anything. And that might look like I'm disengaged.
Yes.
She said, and I'm raging this internal battle, just trying to stay in my chair.
Yeah.
And so when we think about that and the impact on inclusion, right?
Yeah.
Like how to, like getting somebody to the space and the place where they can contribute fully. So, Kirsten, in your experience, what does it look like to be an ally?
Yeah, well, if I could just step back and talk about, you gave a couple of great examples of how it might show up. What you might see in terms of behaviors, and this will help in terms of the link to inclusion. So it may be someone who kind of shuts down or doesn't contribute a lot in meetings, or doesn't take opportunities that they may be perfectly qualified for to share their ideas with a group, or to present something, or to take an advancement or a promotion. It may look like people who, when there are social gatherings, whether it's our teams going to lunch, or we're going to do a happy hour, or whatever that may be, that there's always a reason why they can't. And what happens is, over time, a lot, it's assumed, well, they won't go anyway, or they don't want this opportunity, or they don't contribute. So we stop asking, we stop inviting.
Or they're not a team player, right?
Yeah, right. And so, and so when we start to have those beliefs about them, and we don't invite them, we don't include them, or we don't believe that now they are capable or able, that has a huge impact on how included they feel, whether or not they feel belong, and ultimately what they will be able to contribute. And so you may have an incredibly talented person who you're not seeing all that they've got to give. And one of my favorite quotes is, beneath every behavior is a feeling, and beneath every feeling is a need. And
Mm.
Really good HR advice is when you're giving feedback and when you're observing performance and evaluating performance, you're observing those behaviors, right? Those objective things we can see, we can hear, and that's what we then focus on and give feedback on. It's good, sound advice. However,
Mm-hmm.
what is really important when you're now looking at behaviors where you believe there needs to be action to correct them or improve them, there's a couple really important things to remember.
Okay, so
One,
we're shifting now, right? Into
yeah,
here's what it would look like,
yeah,
and then uh, talking about both how to be an ally, but also how to be a leader, right?
yes,
So those folks that are watching that maybe are in an HR function, or are managing people, like this section's for you. So hit it, Kirsten.
right. Yeah, so I'll start with that the behavior stuff. So we do need to give feedback around behaviors. We do need to address them. What we need to remember, particularly, well, and I think it's in any case for anyone, is the more we can understand what's beneath that behavior, the better able we are to work with, to partner with the person to help them improve, change, or eliminate, depending on what the behavior is, that behavior. I'll give you an example. So if you, for example, have someone like the person that you mentioned that maybe doesn't speak up, that's putting all their energy into being there,
Yep.
and to trying to be present, and to trying to behave the way is appropriate in a meeting. There's less energy then to be put into the contribution, and maybe even what feels like an inability to contribute. And so I may say, as a manager, I've noticed that you don't contribute in meetings, right? This is what I have observed. You need to start contributing more. So, I know this stuff. So
Right,
next time we talk about it, next time I want to hear you say this, okay, and you could leave it at that. However, that's not going to change the behavior, right? And so
right, that's going to pile on this
right,
anxiety because now they're watching me to see
exactly.
Yeah.
It actually feeds into the fear that underlies this kind of anxiety.
Right.
And so it's really, now proactively, the more we can know our employees and how they show up and how they operate as individuals, and to be able to develop a trusting relationship with them, the better able we are to have the kind of conversations and to be able to observe through some different lenses, so that we can partner with them to change, improve, or eliminate behavior so that they can contribute more fully.
Yeah, and there's also a cultural piece to this, right? Around, are you setting up a culture that is a growth mindset culture? I feel like everything goes back to either Maslow or Carol Dweck. So Carol Dweck's work, right, in growth mindset, like, have you set up a culture with the expectation that there is going to be failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an opportunity, and that we'll try different things. And so even the overarching piece for this, so sure, there's the individual, but then there's the, hey, we're all, if there are going to be mess ups, there are going to be mistakes. Those aren't career ending.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's actually how we know we're making progress.
That's
So
right.
that piece in terms of inclusion is really important. And then even just like going back to this idea of the meeting, we're setting up meetings for a very small percentage of individuals to actually thrive.
Mm-hmm.
So if you talk about even just your introverts in the room, and then talk about folks with social anxiety, they are absolutely hamstringed in their ability to give input, to be a part of that process, if it's just left to be a free for all. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear ideas,
Yeah.
in terms of how you've seen good organizations do this, where you really are setting up folks with social anxiety in these sort of, the ability to give input.
Yeah. So, you made some really incredibly important points there. There's the individual, right, who is showing up or not showing up, and but is kind of the subject of this. You've got the leader, and then you've got the environment or the culture, and all three of those things are really important. And so, if we think about what you talked about in terms of the culture, and is it a growth mindset culture, I would take that even more broad and say, is it a culture of psychological safety? And so, am I able to show up authentically and vulnerably? And is that modeled by leaders, right? So, it's one thing to say, hey, we are okay with disagreement. We're okay with comments like, I'm overwhelmed right now, that vulnerable stuff. We're okay with challenge. We're right. And so, and big new ideas and all those things. It's another thing to have leaders not only modeling that, but rewarding that.
Right.
Whether that, and including mistakes, and showing then what is the path forward in terms of the growth mindset approach to mistakes. So that culture of psychological safety is also very related to inclusion in terms of difference is invited, it's accepted, it's hopefully appreciated, those different perspectives that might lead to disagreement, might lead to what feels like challenge, but that we see the bigger opportunity in that. So that is really, really important.
It's interesting, and that's foundational, whether we're talking about social anxiety,
For sure.
every aspect. We actually also built that into the app, right? Like,
Awesome.
how do you create psychological safety? Because it all has to start there.
Yeah.
Um, so then, let's talk about how I can be an ally.
Yep.
So there are, let's say, we just talked about kind of from the leader perspective, setting that tone, the culture, how you can set people up in those conversations to take it next. And actually, well, we can wrap this into the ally piece too, because there are individual behaviors in the meetings, right? But making sure everybody's got a chance to speak, that written is just as okay, that you take breaks, right? And that you come back and people are able to contribute, that you're allowing people, whether that, multimodal ways of getting their ideas and input into a project.
Yeah, I think that's critically important. And you've mentioned a couple of really great techniques. And also, one of the things that I found to be very helpful is for all people is sending out ahead of time, here's the agenda or the topic for discussion or something to think about, so that you've had an opportunity to process or rehearse. If it feels like I'm going to be evaluated here on my performance, I want to kind of practice how I might show up. Whatever it might be, but everybody comes more prepared. So doing those kind of things. And then what you said as well, it is at whoever's facilitating that meeting, making sure that there are established, kind of ground rules or ways of being. Here's how we are together in meetings. Yeah. We make sure everyone has a voice. And if I, as the facilitator or leader of the meeting, notice that some folks aren't, I will invite them. But it's an invitation, because we don't also want to put someone on the spot. So it's an invitation. I noticed you haven't said anything. Is there something you'd like to add? And I can come back to you if you'd like as well. And the person then has permission to say, yes, I have something to add, or they have permission to say, not right now, can you come back to me?
Yeah.
But we've invited
the invitation piece of it, and also giving me time so that maybe I do have something to add, but not okay. There was a professional organization years ago that I was going to my first meeting, and I thought one of the things they did was brilliant. They said, I can't remember the woman's name, I'll call her Rashida, is going to be there waiting for you.
Okay.
And so I knew that Rashida was going to be waiting for me out in the lobby. I didn't have to walk into that big room alone, not knowing anybody. Now, for me, flaming extrovert, I would have been fine. But I thought, how great, because even that, right, is kind of a like walking into that. So I think there's also, in terms of being an ally for somebody on your team, if you see the person that isn't showing up to those lunches, or when it's time for the social activities, they're not showing up, or they're not speaking up in the meetings, and you know that they've got like they're hiding their brilliance, be an ally, right? And
Mm.
be that person waiting in the lobby, right? Say like, hey, I'm going to be your meeting buddy, right?
Yep.
You know, and is it okay if I, ask you occasionally, do you have anything that you'd like to share? Right?
Yep.
Is it like, if we are going to have lunch, I'll come down and I'll meet you on the shop floor, or I'll meet you at your office and we can walk over together.
Yeah.
Just like that anxiety, so that person isn't alone in that, I think is really easy allyship behavior.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example because oftentimes asking for help, whether that is that interaction with somebody that maybe I don't know or I don't have a relationship with, or because I feel like I'm supposed to know and I'm embarrassed to ask for help, that now is showing up in terms of Zoom meetings, for example, or whatever platform you use. And so even starting a meeting, a Zoom meeting, or and saying, is there anyone that wants me to just run through kind of how all of the different controls work or the different functions work? Even if you just need a refresher, or maybe you haven't used it for a while, or maybe you've never used it, but would you like me to do that? And every time I do that, at least one person says yes. If
Oh my
you,
God,
if,
thank you so much.
yeah,
I didn't know how to screen share, or I didn't know how to, and it seems like every time, like the technologies are also changing. I love that practice.
yeah.
Y-
Yeah. So, so and especially right now, but always, if we assume that there is at least one person in a meeting or in a group setting that may have some level of discomfort, all the way to a lot of anxiety, and we think about proactively, what can we do to invite, what can we do to um, maybe anticipate what might create some of that fear. So your example was a wonderful one. Someone will be waiting for you, or if it's a Zoom meeting, or it's any meeting, and this is the way we operate. We've got a new person in, but trying to anticipate and be proactive about offering information, about giving permission around things, and about inviting.
I
I think
think,
those.
and what's great about that is we often talk about curiosity, right? And what a great tool for inclusion curiosity is. And so, for somebody who does not have social anxiety, asking, what might this person be thinking, feeling, experiencing? How can I get rid of some of those barriers? How can I be an ally? How can I lead well? And just, putting yourself as much as you can in another person's shoes, and then asking, right, like how you can support. So I think that's really great, Kirsten, in terms of just you've shared so many good topics, and I think one of the things that I get asked, because I've done we're like 7.5, almost 8 years into an online workshop series. We've done a bunch of digital training. People are like, oh, I hate being on camera. I'm like, how do you do that? Oh, blah, blah. It's like, just disassociate.
Mm,
Like, I'm like, well, that person, like, she's up there talking, right? Or like, I see that person in the frame, but I can almost see, you know, sounding a little bit schizophrenic right now, right? Like that other person. But I think sharing with people that, everybody thinks their voice sounds weird.
mm,
Everybody thinks their hair looks terrible. Everybody, that whole thing. And by the way, nobody is paying as much attention to you in that frame as you are.
yes.
So I think even just like allowing people to, I've also seen some really great things that teams have been doing where they're just as like, it's baseball hat day, right? Like, throw on a hat if you want to, do whatever, let's all wear our hoodies today, or, to make people comfortable, even in this new, for many people, they've been doing it forever. We have talked about this, Jorge Casada and I talked about it last week, that there are a lot of things around inclusion right now that, and accommodations that are being made, that it's showing that for people with disabilities, for other, that
Yeah.
accommodations can be made, right? So
Yeah.
let's take these
Yeah.
best practices, all the things that we're learning, and apply them. And thinking about, I shared a stat in the write up for this that 15 million adults in the US alone experience social anxiety. It's the third most common mental health issue. It's a
Yeah.
real deal. And so everything that Kirsten just shared, whether that's the psychological safety, inviting people to speak, how you're giving that feedback, and getting to, what's the need underneath the behavior. All of those things are pretty easy for us to do as leaders. We just have to be intentional about it.
Yeah. And if I could add, one of the things that I often have heard from managers is, look, I've been told by HR, I can't ask about this kind of stuff. Like I need to stay away from that. And I think what's important to know about that is you can ask, how are you? And not how are you doing? Because we know how that goes. Well, I'm fine, or I'm good. And I'm doing, so it's not that greeting that we have, but how are you really? And then really listening to that. And if you on a regular basis say, how are you?
Mhm.
And then really listen, that makes a big difference. And I think the other thing is language is really, really important. So our minds want us to solve problems. We always are trying to solve problems. And so what's really easy to do is when you hear someone say, I'm really struggling right now, if they feel they can share that, or I'm really overwhelmed right now, it's like, okay, what should we do? But
Right.
yeah, and we don't want that isn't what's called for, because in that moment, it's just about listening and hearing. And I think the other thing that's really hard is that we have to assume, our minds might tell us that based on our experience and our lens, that this is what they're experiencing, this is what that means. That's what our brain does, right? Ladder of inference. But what they're experiencing is what they're experiencing. And so assuming that whatever they tell you is what they're feeling or experiencing is what's real for them, whether you understand it, whether you can relate to it, whether you even believe it, that isn't for you to decide. And so when you hear what they're saying things like, thank you for trusting me with this, for saying, help me understand, or is there something that you need? How can I partner with you? Is there a way I can support you? But to say things like, it's not that bad, things will be fine, once this virus is over, you'll be good. Those are very dismissive. So the language is really, really important.
Yeah. Oh, and again, all aspects of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, language is so powerful. Um, we have just covered a lot of ground. And I have to say, Kirsten, like all of the people that have worked with you over the years are so lucky. Even,
Mm.
the tools that you shared here in terms of inclusion and specifically for folks with social anxiety. I'm just so glad we're finally having more conversation.
Me too.
That like we're sort of wiping aside the stigma. We have people, there was just somebody this last week, and of course now I can't remember, um, talking, sharing their bipolar diagnosis, like very,
Yeah.
so wonderful. And knowing that we have, think about the people on your teams and some of the behaviors that we talked about, the not showing up, or the being really quiet, or somebody that has this high potential, but they just haven't,
Mhm.
they're not raising their hand for things. Um, think about implementing some of these practices, because you very likely have somebody on your team with social anxiety, right?
Very likely. Yeah.
Right. And how to really make sure that they're feeling included and like they belong, and the strength that'll bring to the whole team. So, any last thought you want to drop on us, Kirsten, before we wrap up?
Any last thoughts? I think right now, given the COVID-19 situation that we're in, we are social animals. Our brains are wired for social and emotional connection with other humans, not just our dogs, right? But it's really important.
All the dogs are winning right now.
Yes. And so right now, I just read a study that 50% of people are experiencing a much greater level of stress and anxiety than they have in the past. And a lot of that is being triggered by this lack of human touch and human connection. And it's really more, if we think of this more as a physical distancing, not a social distancing, we continue to connect with people in important ways. That doesn't help the touch part, which is really important to us. But all of this is having an impact on our mental wellness and our mental health. And so for folks that were coming into this already with mental health challenges or experiences that already made kind of daily life difficult, it is more important than ever to be really open, to be empathetic, to be inviting, and to your point before, making conversation about how we're feeling really normal. Make that normal.
Yeah, what I love is that's how we started this, like how you started doing your work. And if you all are not connected with Kirsten on LinkedIn, I recommend it. I always find the things that you post really thought-provoking, and it'll be great to see as you're coming out with this whole human connection piece, with the kid side of things. It's so exciting because we're equipping a next generation with ways to talk about how they're feeling and to deal with, different aspects of how we show up in the world. I can't wait for those tools to be available for adults as well. So thank you, Kirsten. It was great having you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Important topic. Thank you.